And I'm here today with Yancey Strickler how do you introduce yourself these days? I was going to say of MetaLabel, but you can do your intro.
Sure. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fine.
hmm
Just another human. I think we're on either side of the Atlantic from each other.
That's right. Yeah. And yeah, I guess I should just say that I discovered Yancey's writing a couple years back. I think I discovered the Dark Forest articles first, essay through somebody else, and then started digging a little bit more. And there was a lot of like aligned things happening. So I was like many musicians and many people looking for an other thing. I was exploring lots of stuff, and I felt like, a lot of what you were writing about really resonated. And since then, I have been experimenting with MetaLabel and naturally doing a lot of the things that I think a lot of us are talking about, finding myself in chat groups, finding myself battling with this beast that we're all dealing with. I always think I think one of the things that will probably become a theme today as we talk is that me and many others think that music is special and different um, in lots of layered ways. But the
Can
way
we
that it's made,
rewind? Can I rewind to something you said?
yeah, go for it. Yeah,
I
go.
just want to. You said like all musicians, or something like all musicians. I was
Yeah,
looking for my other thing.
yeah.
Let's talk about that. Tell me, what is the other thing? Why all musicians? What are you
My
thinking about? Yeah.
my 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 current thinking. I work at a music university as well, right? So I work with a lot of young musicians every year. I come in contact with like 200 to 300 young people, people of all ages really, but largely sort of, mid-20s and down. And it's really interesting to me that there's kind of this idea that when I go there, and also my industry friends think that they expect them to be very like social media savvy. They think that all these people are like, have you got any young kids who are amazing at socials? Let's bring them in. Or like, we're looking for someone to run this campaign. And actually what I find is they're not very social media savvy. And the reason I'm saying this is I think there is still this mentality of musicians of there is like a very singular path that people see as like success, right? Which has been, established for tens of years, which is that when things aren't working, there's a number of things that are to blame. Especially once you're in the system, right? Which is the label not doing its job, marketing not going well, and the generally has been to get a deal, right? And I think that music, listening to you and Josh talk quite a lot has been interesting for me because I think like the kind of I see like art and music and things in different places, but I do think all the issues are coming together now, right? But I think that for music, the idea has always just been one thing, right? Is you are good, people see you, you do a deal, and then you go up. And if you don't go up, it's because the label's not doing its job, or and maybe that's become even more so because the labels have become more reliant on the artist to do the work. So when I talk about an other, especially now, I mean, I have lots of industry guests come in, and for a long time, up until like 2 or 3 years ago, where it became a bit uncool, they were all just like, if you're not on social media posting 4 times a day, we're not interested. Like, we can't do this thing for you. Like, this is on you. This machine, you know, it's like going to a bank without a business plan to them, right? Like, if you make this thing work, then sure, we can come on board and amplify it. And so I think that that mentality is super common in music circles. While you can definitely tell me if I'm wrong here, the perception is for musicians that like art and other places have, like maybe have a more sort of, I don't know. I guess you could argue that live music is not like that, but I think more and more musicians have become online. The only way used to be seen used to be to play out, right? And now that playing out is online, it seems like a lot of people doing it on their own, like you've talked about in the past, in their kind of little bubble. Um, yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? It's like I post every day, and people get stuck in that rhythm, and for a minute, you feel like it's working. Me too. Oh, I've been doing it. I've been posting 4 times a day. I've gone from like 4,000 followers to 5,000 followers, and but where now we've been doing that for a while. Even some people I know who have 100,000 followers are like, yeah, but now what? Um, so I guess the other is not playing the social media game, for want of a better way of saying it.
Well, we'll make today can just be, we'll just do some therapy today, Jamie. Because
It's already started, hasn't it? Yeah.
because you started talking about what the ultimate dream of success is, and before you even said what it was,
Right.
you're like, and let me tell you who you blame if it doesn't happen. Before you
Yeah,
even
yeah,
said
yeah,
what it is,
yeah,
you're like,
yeah,
let me
yeah,
tell
yeah.
you who wronged you. But I think that like every, I mean, every the challenge of our lives living up to our dreams is not like specific to just musicians.
Sure.
And in every form, in every form, whatever we're into, we're probably inspired by someone incredible,
Hmm.
some musician or some artist or some filmmaker that like changed the way we saw the world. We think of them as our model, we study them, we find people similarish. We largely listen and pay attention to things that we like that are probably in general successful, fairly
Sure.
successful. And then that becomes our model. And it's, I mean, it makes sense that that's our model, but in some cases, that model might have been built in a different time.
Hmm.
Also, that model normally involves, it involves us looking at like the one salmon that made it upstream and not the 999 that didn't make it upstream.
Of course, always. Yeah.
And yeah, and so there's just a way that I think that we mirror, but maybe to our detriment, where we have these expectations that it should happen for us the same way. I gave an experience. I talked about in a conversation with Josh about I published a book with a major publisher, and I had big dreams for what it was going to do. I was like, you couldn't. Uh, I dreamed of being like a Oprah book club book, right? You like because yeah, I don't know why not, but
Why
then
not? Yeah.
that's like a cool thing to have on your vision board or whatever. But when it didn't happen for me, I got all emo about it. And I talked myself into being that the project was a failure and lots of things that had no bearing to any real objective truth beyond my own personal expectations. And so that is like I think that is a phase of the creative journey that we all have. And for some people, you're like Dua Lipa or something, and you actually crush it, and you become and you surpass, you become the 1 in 1,000 that makes it, or 1 in 1 million. Um, but creativity, creative practices, I think, are an infinite game. And my father is a 75-year-old musician, guitar player who plays every day, who loves playing, who's been in many bands, and like maybe didn't make it according to one measure, but also plays music daily, is an incredible guitar player, has deep love for it. It's like music has given him so much, and he has given
Sure.
so much to it. And like, what
Yeah.
else is there to ask for it but
Right.
a life of love? And but it generally takes us time to recognize those things. And but that is the space where we realize why we're doing it. And uh, I think is often a deep conversation with ourselves and ourself and the
Hmm.
universe, and how other people respond to it in reality is immaterial to that relationship for us. It will make us feel at certain moments, it will help us feel more confident or like we matter, which is an important step.
Yeah, yeah.
But ultimately, like that's all it's doing, is just like giving you that confidence, but really it's still within you.
Hmm.
There is no validation like the validation that you give yourself from
Yeah.
accepting and enjoying what you're doing.
Sure.
Um,
It's hard to
but it's
separate the
difficult.
purpose, right? Yeah, it's hard to separate this idea of like feeling seen at the same time. right? Like I think that is one of the hardest things for everybody is the idea that it doesn't matter. The what's the tree being chopped? Did it ever happen in the forest? That whole thing of like. I think that is. I guess like one of the things that I'm dealing with on these courses is like almost teaching, right? That like at the moment the language is your relationship with your art is like an established language, and you're trying to teach people like a new language to speak to their creative side, right? Which is it redefines what it is in their lives. And social media makes it hard, right? Because all the version that you would like is in front of you every day. And I think that is one of the big differences between how hard it was and how hard it is. It's always been incredibly hard, but there is this slightly different thing of like at the touch of your fingertips is this other version and this other person and this other almost like the kind of like the dark voice on your shoulder is forever in your hand. And maybe also there's probably some arguments as to the healthiness of being what you had to do to meet other people in the past, which was I'm old enough to have come through a point in time where the only way to make any progress was to go places and speak to people. And I'm also old enough to have learnt how to make music using a manual without tutorials. And I've quickly now learned how useful that is to me in life because I'm pretty confident I can learn anything now. While a lot of my young students, they are very overwhelmed by the amount of information. Well, there's a lot of options. There's a lot happening out there, and I think that is a struggle for your creators. I think actually you and Josh's work has been quite good at distilling into some quite interesting ways of looking at things, which I've actually built a couple of sessions out of those talks. Um, just the simple things of telling your story, and there was some really like meaningful analogies to do with like what makes someone care.
Hmm.
I think Josh told one about some artists who changed the ink they used to being from a place. I think that was a really great analogy. I used that in a classroom, and I could see it. I could see it hitting home to a
Yeah.
lot of people,
Yeah.
of the context of why that context matters. So yeah, I
Well,
guess like
yeah,
oh,
I was like, um, I'm not romantic about the past, nor do I think hearing people talk about the past is that interesting exactly. But, thinking of like the pre-internet creative world, I mean, the biggest challenge, like if you were signed to a major label, and really all that mattered were major labels, major film studios, there weren't really indies in an accessible way. Like if you're
mhm,
signed to one of those, you existed. If you weren't signed to one of those, you did not exist. And it was extremely difficult to see or find other things like you. And the struggle was like, you get a lot of weird things that crop up in different contexts and genres because someone just, the Clean or in New Zealand and they make a certain type of spazzy music, that becomes its thing. But, back then the challenge was, am I the only person in the world? And now the challenge is like, oh, I'm like one of so many.
mhm,
I'm one of so many people. And like what is possibly special about me? And this is what leads the internet to invent like identityism, just creation of meaning through sub identity. Like that will definitely that has been a proven model for meaning making for the past 10 years. Does that last forever? We'll see. Um, but like, yeah, the constant comparing of yourself to others, always a bad thing, always hurts, always hurts. And probably we all have our different comparison engines that are bad for us.
sure.
Twitter used to be that for me. It's Instagram for a lot of people, and um yeah, it's an easy way to self-immolate, uh just at the snap of a finger. But I think that, I mean, I still struggle through that. But things I've learned, number one, you meet the people who are more successful than you in some outside thing, and you feel very grateful not to be them.
Yeah.
actually.
Mhm.
Just because, like, the very online life is actually miserable.
Yeah.
And you spend time with someone who has a really big following, and like the amount of time they're on a phone versus like present is insane. It's
Mhm.
truly insane. So, like, if someone is great online, I generally think that means their actual life is probably a bit shit. Because they're just not that, like, not that alive to the world around them.
Sure.
Um, and number two is just that I think everyone who is like exceptional does tend to specialize, have a thing that they're great at. They're really good at making videos, they're really good at writing, they're really good at, some specific thing. And all of us mid-twits, of which I will put myself in that category, we make the mistake of trying to do everything because we consume everything.
Mhm.
And we are trying to find our leg up, and so we want to be in every channel, so we try to do everything because we think that's what we have to do. But just that the people who are really exceptional tend to specialize in a thing, and maybe they're good at conjugating it, to make sure they're in some feeds. But every time I feel myself trying to like do too many types of things at once, or I like sort of get nervous, like, hey, uh is this playing to my strengths, or am I like trying too hard? Like, what am I actually good at? Like, what would I cry if I couldn't do?
Mhm.
Imagine someone like takes your hand away and says, like, you can't do one of these things. Which one are you like actually furious about? That's probably the only thing that you should be doing, maybe. But I think those are little traps we get ourselves into when we follow the logic of the crowd and the logic of the feed.
So if we discussed my other, um, some of the others that you have kind of like posited recently, I guess like in your work, but also in conversation, is obviously this big idea of doing things together, right? That sense of purpose and um, like a lot of the positive things that come from doing things with other people, right? Like which has been like established for a long time, but there's kind of like you've been exploring some new frameworks for that, particularly with MetaLabel. I think also conceptually with like the Dark Forest collective. I think one of the things that I found hard, and I think others are finding hard, which I thought one of the things that I would be cool to talk to you about today is that mobilizing those relationships is actually very hard, right? Especially if, you have quite a strong feeling about this could be great, right? Like imagine all these things, if we put all this stuff together, um, you know, m music from my perspective, but also many things I'm sure is I guess is like quite a seen as quite a singular journey, and getting people to collaborate has even probably got harder because there's this perception that people are cultivating their algorithm in Spotify and things, right? And I guess like their social media feeds become these like coveted spaces where they only want to focus on one thing. I think I've done a couple of quite large scale collective releases, and I think one of the things that was maybe I shouldn't have been surprised about was that I was the most passionate about the collective element. And like when it came out, my expectation was that everyone's going to share it and do things. And I've kind of learned that people my feeling at the moment, I should say, is that if I do this again, it needs to be a bunch of people who are as committed to it as me. Um, and I think it would just be cool to hear some thoughts from you about maybe like I know it's impossible. They often come through chance, but I guess like cultivating relationships with people to sort of do this new approach with. I think like that's what I'm seeing people finding it hard to do in music because that's my circle. I know you can't advise specifically on music, but I'm not in art fields and things. There's not a lot of collective models in music.
So there's a
That
band. There's a band.
well,
It
there
is
is a
it has the one.
band, but
And even in well, listen, even in 1961, 62, when the
yeah,
Beatles came out, I'm reading this amazing book, deep book, but like the original press release about the Beatles had to explain what a band was. It
I
said
love
they are
that.
a group that sings, that two people sing the songs and two other people play the music, but they're all one thing together called a band.
Yeah, that's cool.
So you say you don't have it. No, y'all are like all up in it. But I think that like I do not believe in collaboration theater. I do not believe I think most people are resistant. Most creative people are going to, especially quality creative people, are going to be resistant to open, just fully open collaboration because you've worked hard to create your voice and you have your point of
Sure.
view and the
Mm.
work, and you know that like you will always be dragged down by the most mediocre person in a room. And like a lot of how you build your practice and career, if you go through schooling or anything, you a little bit learn that you have to like protect your shit. Uh, to me, the gateway is not like just collaboration. To me, it's this idea of co-releasing. And that is what has been an easier thing for me, where it's like, yeah, some part of this is mine, some part of this is yours. Ultimately, it's being published in a way that is has both of us inside of it, and there is like a mutual clout benefit that comes from that we both draw from. Um, what you have found is also true that uh, those sorts of situations have imbalanced power dynamics, both in terms of who holds the sway in making the decisions, but most materially, one person's going to end up doing almost all the work. Um, in my Dark Forest projects, it's been myself and Lath, our designer, that have done the bulk of the work.
Mhm.
And, the first Dark Forest anthology, I sourced 11 pieces that were already written that I liked. And so it was
Right.
like an easy ask. And I made a telegram and put us all in it. And Lath and I started making the book. And honestly, it wasn't until they all received their physical copies, maybe a year in, that I felt like the other members really started to be engaged. And it was when I
Mhm.
saw it and could hold this thing, I'm like, oh, this is like, y'all did this proper. Wait, I'm proud of this. And I did a lot of back channel emailing, messaging to get each person to share. Still, not everyone in that group has shared it, but it was enough. And again, like every time the MetaLabel split pays out and people get an email saying you just got $500, literally I'll see members of the group then like tweet the book
Yeah.
again, you know?
Yeah.
So, but like that still for me was a super fun experience because I like to edit, I like to put together things. It's
Mhm.
fun. I like coordination, and it's just also brought in, and now other projects. People just started knocking on the door, and so now I'm doing similar things with other people,
Yeah.
and I'm just finding myself in a space of constant some line between co-releasing and collaborating, where we're not making a new work together, but I'm helping a work happen, or someone else is helping my work happen.
Mhm.
And to me, the outcomes of that, I mean, I've done so many projects in the past 2 years, and then most of them have been with other people. Um, and I will just, yeah, I would say, like, certainly the execution of something with someone else is more difficult than just on your own, but like for sure more fun, like just actual fun, and having something at stake with another person, having a late night call to get something ready, going through that together is just fun. Like
Yeah, that's the real thing, right? Yeah.
that's fun. So
Mm.
to me, I think I don't expect everyone to be good at collaborating. I don't think collaborative art is necessarily better than non-collaborative art. I think possibly the opposite is the case. But I think that we all benefit from shared contexts, that we all benefit from the idea of co-releasing or just aligning with each other. And that both the emotional, I think the emotional, the practical, and the economic outcomes of that in general are
Mhm.
like net positive for you.
Sure.
But it, hopefully we can all like in some projects be the organizer that has to do all that work, but maybe in other projects we get someone else curates us, and
Yeah.
we get the benefits, but not having to do every step. But they're hard. They're hard, but I find them to be good experiences, and you just really learn. You learn a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I've thoroughly enjoyed it, but yeah, I guess part of it for me, like you say, is wanting to find some people to do the work with, as well as just contribute to the work, if that makes sense. Like contribute things to the project. And I'm speaking to a bunch of people about doing like a music compilation using MetaLabel, and my opening gambit was very similar to what you mentioned, which was like, just don't worry about it. It's non-exclusive. You can just take the song that you've already got out there that you love, and let's put them together and introduce all these works that kind of have a thread to each other's audiences, right?
Yeah,
Or new audiences, which is just a compilation, right? But I think
yeah.
there is a difference, which is where it exists, how the splits work, and you know the label,
Well,
the meta label structure essentially.
and also just how you curate it, because I think like um you could tell a specific story. There could be the dark forest compilation of the internet. It could be about, six songs that have never been played on a certain data. There's all sorts of ways that you could tell a story that reinforces what it means to belong. You know, the it the dark forest work, has carved out a space for us now as like sort of a go-to part of the canon for
Mhm.
understanding a certain era of the internet. But that's just going to keep continuing because, like, we're putting out a book from Nadia Asparova next week, Anti-Memetics, which I think is going to be a quite influential book for understanding where the internet is now. And we have another book coming out later this year from Mindy Sue that is also going to be extremely influential with a new set of language for like the internet.
I've already
And
bought my book, my
yeah,
anti-memetics book. I'm waiting for it. Yeah,
yeah, it'll ship out next week.
yeah,
But
exciting.
like, but it began, that began with me writing a tiny newsletter to 300 people that's expanded. Other people picked up on it. It gets re-anthologized, expands to feel more meaningful. And now it's like achieving credibility. And this is how things go from the edge to like institutionalized in
Hmm.
this no one unplanned, natural. It just kind of happens, the water slowly boils kind of way. And it's super interesting. It's honestly one of the reasons why I wanted to make the book, is I felt like it's this specific topic has circulated enough that it could be canonized in a way that like could propel a deeper canonization.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but that's just like, people LARPing self-legitimacy on the internet, and sometimes it can work.
yeah, yeah. Sometimes it does work. Yeah. Um, so when you kind of look forward at next steps, actually, let me ask one more question. Actually, I was thinking something today that I haven't heard about much from you about, and I know that um, it's something that really interests me about you on a personal level. Is that I consume a lot of these, the kind of conversations that you have around this thing, like your TED talk and your podcast and things. But there's also this like other side of your world, which is that you are running a company, right? That you're a person who has raised money. Um, you're in charge of running a business. You have employees and growing brands. And I think I always think it's interesting that you don't come across stereotypically as the people that normally do those things. And maybe that's just my interpretation of that. But I was interested to ask you this. It's very very to say this. This version of Yancey now, that this version that I have of you that I think others do. Like, did you start businesses? Did you see yourself as somebody who was going out to start businesses, platforms, before you saw yourself as a creator? Have they always been happening at the same time? Were you a writer and then, like that's very hard. They're very hard things to do, and I think that's a very interesting future for other creators like me, is like, that there are other creative entities that I would like to help develop. And I think that world has been very complex for me to navigate. The language of investment, the language of funding, the language of
Yeah,
capital.
yeah,
It'd be cool just to hear you talk about those two things.
yeah,
I guess like you as a creator and you as a founder. Is that the right
yeah.
word?
Well, what's funny is when you're like this other side of me, I was just thinking what my actual real life friends tell
But
me
you're
who
actually, yes, sure.
who
Yeah,
consume my content. They're just like, why are you so serious all the time?
yeah.
Like my actual persona is like kind of silly. I joke around a lot. Yeah, can have a a deep persona, but a lot of lightness too that really doesn't come through. And I don't try to communicate through the page. But yeah, I'm a writer first. Always what I've cared about, and who I am. And I had day jobs when I first moved to New York in 2000, working at radio stations and digital music services. And it was while working at eMusic, an early digital music service. I was the managing editor there. I started being in product meetings and in marketing meetings, and it ended up I had good ideas or instincts, and I kept being invited back. And I just learned that I don't know, I could pick those things up, and I understood product and technology well. I studied some CS in college, but just I could hang in those spaces. And as Kickstarter began, we like hired business consultants to teach us how to make a business plan. And we were three creative people trying to figure out how to make a company and like
Hmm.
reading books about how to start a company and how to how to get investment. I read Fred Wilson's blog every day. That's how I learned so much of how venture works. And I often felt guilty doing that because my creative generation, I feel like just always raised with a very clear line between like art and money, art and sports. You couldn't like you had to choose one, one of those or two of those. And yeah, so that was always something that I felt a real tension around. But then you're just, Kickstarter forced me to learn. Um, so I would say at this point, I mean, being a founder for 12 years in a project that went from, borrowing and stealing from friends to just get anything off the ground to being an extremely successful name brand company and Kickstarter. And I, personally experienced every step of that, including to, trying to mature a startup into a big company that could do all the things it's supposed to do, and honestly struggling through a lot of that. So I just kind of lived through that experience and always was able to acclimate. Um, but in the period after Kickstarter, I left in 2017, and I returned to being a writer. I wrote a book and became really a creator. And like returning to writing a book, I found myself again. I'm like, oh yeah, this is who I am. This is who I actually am. Writing a book for a year and a half was extremely hard, but I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And somehow the events of life pushed in such a direction that ideas I was writing and ways I was searching to cure myself, um, led to creating MetaLabel. And really like the pivotal point that's interesting is I like had a burnout moment with the community I was leading, and I was writing ideas that feeling inspired about a different way of thinking of a record label and these historical things. But the pivot point was that I'd written this up I was going to send as a newsletter. Hey, here's a theory. Like labels are way different than anything we've thought of. And my wife was like, maybe if you send that, you're just going to keep feeling, lonely or whatever the feelings are. Like maybe you should do something different. And instead I thought, well, there are like five people I'm thinking about when I wrote this, like Toby Shore and John Higgs, friend who runs Beggar's Banquet, a few different people. And I was like, you know what, instead I'm just going to like send this Google Doc to them personally, and just say, I haven't published this, but just like curious what you think. And I got such a strong reaction from all those people, and some of them shared it with other people, and I started sort of sharing that Google Doc with other people, to where eventually MetaLabel became a project that, even though I didn't know what it was or would be, the amount of energy coming back to me privately
Hmm.
was just like, I think I have to follow this through. And I wasn't looking to. I didn't intend to. I didn't
Hmm.
want to. I honestly didn't want to. Um, but it was just unmistakable the way the doors were opening for it. And so now, now, and the beauty I found is that I now see all, I could feel the ways I've grown in the 8 years in between, being in that leadership chair. Um, I'm look at my previous self with great empathy. And yeah, and I feel at a place where I'm able to operate, you know, with real clarity and maturity, both as a writer, and as a creative person, and as an entrepreneur. And this is just like this peak I think you get in your 40s. Maybe you get like a 15-year peak of just like your physical, emotional, and creative abilities are all like hovering at your top percentile. And then you get that magic of like, okay, here I am fully formed. What am I capable of? And I feel like I'm fumbling around in that darkness, at the moment.
How long ago did you write that piece, that letter that you sent around, that Google document?
That was, I mean, that was May 2021, so 4 years ago.
Ah, I mean, that's a quick turnaround
Yeah, I
to
mean,
like,
well, and the ideas in that had their origin in like 2017. 2017 is really when these ideas began. It was like Adam Curtis and I have always had a nice relationship, and I interviewed him for this piece for TC for Creative Independent. Still, I think maybe the best thing I've written is like editing his words into that piece called The Dangers of Self-Expression. But it was all about how computers see the ways that we are connected and see the powers that we have collectively, but we ourselves do not understand. And to picture someone going out alone in the dark, if you're on your own, you're totally, you're vulnerable. But if you're in a group, no
mhm,
matter what comes at you, you are stronger than it. And he's just like, he says there has to be a way that you can square the circle where people must be individuals. However, they must also be able to be a part of something larger than themselves. And the ability to have both of those things is what we're all looking for and lacking.
mhm.
And we had like a 2-hour conversation about that. And honestly, that so much of that and so much of what he and I have talked about over the years through that, like shaped a lot of the, I don't know, the forms I think I've looked at the world through, and how they framed what seems important to me.
It's interesting because I've made that kind of language, I guess, like comparison about YouTubers before with sort of musician friends of like, there is this kind of like singular idea of what like a band, like you said, right? When and we have every now and then we have like something that people like Brockhampton that people always reference, or the internet where they're like, that's how you should do it. But very rarely do people do that, right? Like it's so commonly referenced, but so uncommon in practice. And I think YouTubers have done it very well, which is they've formed collectives where they maintain identity, but like also their identity being strong and different is an important part of the collective, right? Different characters for different people, which I know you could compare to like girl bands or boy bands almost.
Well,
um
that's where I think the label versus the collective is helpful, because like,
but
yeah,
yeah.
maybe there's only so many internets or Brockhamptons, but like Epitaph Records means
Hmm.
something specific, right? Sub Pop, to be a part of Sub Pop or be a part of K Records in the 90s means something
Right.
specific. So I think that like the collective is of a lot of one-to-one relationships where there is some expectation of some collective, some group decision making.
Mhm.
To me, a label is a more fluid poly relationship
Yeah.
structure where we're just like all we're in a loose dialogue, we're all part of something bigger, yet we are
Hmm.
all retain our distinct individual
Yeah.
identity.
And
And
it's
I
like a
think that's the key.
it's like a reclaiming of the language in a way. Like I think like when I speak to about people, I'm like, no, no, not that thing that you describe as a label.
Yeah.
Like, because the internet's changed that, right? Like there was a time where that infrastructure was only available in this kind of like this thing, right? Other than on the full like grassroots ground floor of like a bunch of people in a house printing out things on a printer and handing out CDs, which is more similar, right? That's the reality.
But like
Um,
I fully believe in like 5 years
yeah,
that label, I could easily imagine that in 5 years, like label is a very accepted internet native term
yeah,
for a squad co-releasing, and that like a music label has to say music label so that people don't
right.
mistake them, for like
Yes,
the
the old
low
format.
the low status internet. We're not the low status
I
internet
know what you
kind of
mean.
label. We're a
Yeah.
we're a record label. But like
Yes.
but yeah, I think collective imposes a value set or a set of aesthetic limitations that
Hmm.
are in contrast with most people's creative drives.
Yeah.
But that something like a label is like a is more of an open invitation to participate and to be a part of something larger than you. And people don't want to be limited, but they want to be expanded. And I think that's a bit of the trick. And yeah, but we'll see how these projects go. I mean, certainly with the Dark Forest Collective, it's wild. We're reaching this point now where people are just reaching out and wanting to do things with us. And
Right.
the very first things I was researching and thinking about that led me to start this project was looking at how when Ian Mackay decided to put out the first Teen Idol 7 inch as the first release on Discord, that before that even came out, the next four things were already signed. Because
Right.
everyone is like, oh, wait, you're putting stuff out now? Like,
Mm.
we make hardcore. We played a show together before. And it is just like sometimes there's just a latent demand.
Mhm.
There's an energy already there that you just can unlock with just the simple invitation of existing.
I love that. Um, yeah, I love that. I'm hoping that's the truth for like many people because I do think there needs to be different things. I'm actually thinking of like potentially, doing a project with students where forming a label is one of the projects, right? Or like, go and find a bunch of people to co-release a bunch of stuff with. Um, there is no like, there is no goals, there's no markers. It's doing the thing and then reflecting on that experience is kind of enough.
I mean,
That's interesting.
imagine you could even just you could start a label and
Mm,
you put out singles. And maybe the first single is by yourself, but like you find other people who, I mean, for anyone to be recognized by anyone else. I mean, we're all looking for legitimacy. And so we can self-legitimize and we can legitimize each other. So you could imagine you as a musician, you could self-legitimize and be, well, there's a label, and the first release is this single by me.
sure.
And the second release is this single by this other person that I think is cool and that I'm going to help legitimize. And now we are both risen, 4% in our
Yeah, yeah.
cultural standing as a result.
Mm,
And the third person and to like that's like even like compact and like the Cologne micro, like that's these super specific. It's like three people, that made that whole world happen,
yeah.
but that's all it takes.
And the pressure's not all on one person's energy, right? Which I think is another important thing, which is this kind of like passing the baton or sharing the weight. There's different modes of it, right? But I think that there is that, especially in today's environment where people are finding the getting to work to people is still a very hard thing to do, right? No matter how you do the work, the majority of people still want that work to be received in some form by others, to be heard. And that is often the psychological, um, I guess, the weight, right? The weight of people like to call it promotional marketing, but I think it's just it's after the completion of the work, what next, and the what next for most people is like putting it out into the world in some way. And I guess that
Yeah,
doing
I
that
mean
with
that's
others is a
hard.
better
Yeah,
experience.
it
Yeah.
is better to do with others. I mean, definitely the promotional part. Maybe sometimes you have to put a mask on.
Hmm.
I definitely go to. I mean, I think about Tyler in both of these cases. I mean, when Odd Future had the Tumblr, they had a weekly publishing schedule, and every different member would drop a new thing each week. So always something new, but no one is having to produce all the time except for Tyler, who's editing.
Right.
But then there's also the great video of Tyler talking at that, I think it was a Converse event, about uh, how he's still promoting an album that came out 2 years before,
Sure. Yeah.
because he believes in it and he's trying to honor that work, and that's what he thinks he has to do. I talk to other pop stars, or and yeah, they'll talk about, yeah, yeah, I do that, but it's a mask. You put on the mask to do that. You
Right.
understand that's a performance of the character, and you know, sometimes easier than others, but that's just what my character has to do sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, I think like that publishing schedule stuff's important. There's a lot of process information and learning experience that I think the New Era podcast does a good job of like sharing some of that. And I think maybe an interesting thing to do to be looking at some, I don't know whether whether the word productivity is the right word, but I think there is like some mechanisms that like, by the third release or the fourth release that people have developed. Like we realized now that I have to do a check-in every week with everyone, or I realize now that it's great to do like a video call once a month, right? Or like you say, to have a schedule, or my friend Martin does a lot of collective stuff of having a prompt to start a conversation. Like each week I'm going to send out a prompt, and everybody has to respond to that prompt with like 5 words, or like just I don't know, rituals, routines, and things that might be interesting to explore in the future as part of like maybe MetaLabel's
Yeah.
output,
Yeah.
is like some ideas of things that other people have done to make these collective things happen or function, or um keep them to go to what do you go to cultivate the garden, to keep it healthy and to keep it growing. And I think that even you just hearing you say that thing about them having a posting schedule, what I've also learned is that you do need to have some of these things installed, or like, and often a person who is maybe slightly more invested than everyone else, an editor.
Yeah. I think it's also possible to, we all have a tendency now, I think, for overproduction. Not
Mhm.
overproduction like, we shouldn't have done the strings and the horn section, but overproduction like just making too much. Partially because AI has made it so easy to make stuff. But I've even experienced, just being really real, like I'm in the midst of editing the on the Creative Life book. It's almost
Mhm.
done. Um, and it's like, I would say, for how it sold in the first week, I was surprised. I thought it would sell more. I thought it would sell more. And I had a moment of thinking about that. And I first I had two thoughts that I immediately thought, oh, these are true things I should think about. Number one was, buy a transcript of podcast conversations. It's probably the worst sales pitch you could imagine.
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
but number two, maybe people are a little bit tired of me right now. Maybe
I
there's
mean,
just been a lot. Maybe there's a lot of me right now. And honestly, I was like, great. Like, I'm okay actually being a little chill, and like I think I might even want to be a little more chill. And while I'm in the midst of editing this book, like, I know how good this book is. It's actually like
mm,
really, really exceptional. And I think it's like could be a real classic, with just how practical it is. But it was an interesting reckoning of like initially being like, wait, I thought, how come we sold 100 copies today and not, 500 or whatever it is? Again, my dream hoped for.
mhm.
Um, but then I just had to put myself in somebody else's shoes for a minute. And I was like, well, yeah, that's fine.
But you
I
do
don't
have
need to
to honor the
care.
work sometimes as well, right? Like I could speak to this because I did this network archives thing where I
Yeah.
took these 30 creative projects. And honestly, with that, I was like, this is the most incredible resource that I have ever found for musicians, right? Like
Yeah.
there is like all these examples of all these different ways that people are world building using technology and art and different things to create these worlds. And my reflection on it is it was just too much, right?
Yeah.
It was just too much to consume. And not only was it just too much at once, it could have been 5 books, right? It could have been 5 PDFs, but also that it's like what I learned as a teacher as well was that people didn't know how to put that into use, right? They didn't have like, it was easier for me to disseminate a case study and be like, oh, I could take this from that and that's useful for that. And I experimented with doing like a free guide, which was like a how
Yeah.
to use.
Yeah.
which I realized became the most important thing for people because what they really wanted was not just like the list of stuff, but like examples of how can I practically go and put this into use and
Yeah.
how can I practically do this. And that's really interesting, but I actually don't have time to read a book like that, right? What I need to know is how to navigate that book. Let's say
Hmm.
like I have this kind of thing I would love to get some ideas for. How can I find my way through that? And we created a chat bot to do it as well. We tried a few
Hmm.
different things, and actually we kind of just lost everybody on the way. But it was like a really good learning experience of like, okay, I have to stop myself from going back to it, being like, but no, 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 it is great. Maybe I should do like break it into five sections for
Well,
five for 1/5 of the price, like and all that kind of stuff.
I think you can, for sure. I mean, for sure. And there's no shame in like our dreams being bigger than what someone can consume. Um, for this specific project, uh, I believe the content is good enough. And so I'm focusing on finishing the book, and I'm going to send out an excerpt, probably the next week from my newsletter that I just think is good, and we'll link to it.
Great.
And I'm going to deliver the digital version to everyone, hopefully by this weekend. And again, I just think once people see it and read it, I think they'll get value out of it, and that's going to make me happy. And
Yeah.
ultimately, these conversations between Josh and I have been uh, a happy accident in life that I've gotten
Mhm.
so much out of that, like, I'm so far ahead on that whole experience. It's ridiculous. And this was even just an attempt for us to commemorate what we've done to apply the lessons of the show. And so everything about it is just a win and is joy. But you have the day. For me, launch days are the worst days.
Yeah.
Launch days of the day I publish, awful, awful. Because even if it gets, just to be metric based, even if it gets 500 likes, I'm like, why didn't it get 1,000? I am useless on those days. The best things I do for my days that I release is if I can be away from a computer all day.
Yeah.
That is the single best thing I could do for myself. Because then you come in, you're like, oh look, people liked it. Rather than each minute being like, why has nobody liked it?
Yeah. 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 I think we all do that, right?
it's
We don't
it,
want to,
it's
but we do.
it's awful. They're my worst. They're my worst. And it's where we have to help ourselves. But just so much of these things, we're just you're winning by being in the game.
Hmm.
And we live in like this crazy moment, like the craziness of now are these two forces. Number one, unprecedented demand for creative output. No matter how much you make, seemingly the feed
Hmm.
wants more,
Yeah.
and it's easier than ever to make more. So unprecedented demand for creative output is one tension. On the other tension, disappearing systems of support. There are very few system support. It's like your Patreon subscribers, it's your subscribers, your followers. It's basically it right now.
Hmm.
Slash what you make in your day job or what your spouse makes. And so creative people feel torn between these two forces. I need to keep making because the prize is so great and I want it so bad. And if I don't do it, I'm going to lose. And yet the rewards and the support systems and the structures that exist to follow that are quite limited.
Right.
Ones that have existed are falling apart. And really, there hasn't been much thought or investment to date, I think, in what's actually needed. Um,
Hmm.
and that is the angst that a lot of us feel. But what I see in that is I see a powerful tension that I think can be really activated in a
Yeah.
much
I
bigger
agree.
way.
Yeah, I agree. I think
And
that
in
we've
that
got
is
to a point.
potential.
We're at a point where those things have got so bad that I feel a much yeah, just much more like this conversation like this that I was having like 2 or 3 years ago where the response was very different, right? And there's a lot more people looking for others. It's got so bad that it's turning off the people it's trying to attack, those other mechanisms. And yeah, people are looking for something else, right? Like that, it did start off as a, the social media. I did used to share pictures of my life, and I did used to go and look at what my friends were doing, and that isn't what most people are using those platforms for anymore. So maybe they're more open to looking for others. I realize we're getting close to the hour. Do you want to maybe just finish? I mean, I'm really looking forward to the book, and I think the New Creative Era podcast has been like really great. I think the fact that they were half an hour, I think it's very approachable. I think, like you said, it's very practical. There's a lot of things you can take away and do from it, and I think it's quite holistic in that there's like a feeling of like yeah, well, I don't know, well-being about it, right? That there is like an
Mm.
acknowledgement of the power of being happy amongst all the advice, and even some of Josh's stuff, which is clearly also like how to deal with this stuff and also try and do well at it. It's done in the there's enough like balance in there.
Hmm.
So maybe we could just end on you saying why you think this book is so important, because you've told us it's important, but
Yeah.
you know
Well, it's
if you have to distill it to somebody in simple words of, I think it's important. I have shared this with many people, but I would like to hear it from you.
well, it's going to end up. It's 250 pages of two creative people in 2025 speaking emotionally and very practically about how they're trying to navigate what we're doing. And we talk about how to make your work stand out, how we've thought about our careers, things we've learned, things we regret, how to price things, like as existential or as practical as you can imagine.
Mhm.
Um, and it's just all very alive to what we're both going through right now. And my partner Josh Citarella, he's on like his superstar track at the moment with like his big video series. So to even talk about that while going through this together. But the finished book, again, I'm going to hopefully deliver the digital version by this weekend. I'll email it to people, but it will have like it's going to extract the practical tips and the takeaways from each chapter. So each chapter is about 5,000 words, and then we'll
Mm.
have a section of like things you can use from this.
Amazing.
Um, but yeah, it's really, the creative life has continued to just be a gift to me, just everyday gift. And I feel like this specific project is trying to reflect back. Um, and just in general, this is obviously a moment of real tumult and change in the creative universe, but I think this is the end of something, but not the end.
Mhm.
It's the end of like the creative classical period, but it's the beginning of a new perpetual creative modernity that I'm excited about. And
Cool.
I think I embrace the 21st century of how our creative practices are going to shape. And in the first 25 years of this century, I think creative culture has really shown through, and that's going to keep going. So we're at a moment of tension and a moment of doubt. Um, but I have faith in the imagination and drive and will of people coming up now and all the people that will come. And I think the future of our practice is very bright.
That's a great note to end on. It's nice to hear that. I like the idea of kind of like we've reached like this, you know, beginning of a different phase, whatever that phase might be. I think that is like a useful way to look at things. Yeah, and for anyone watching this, I guess I should do the plug, right? Which is the book is on MetaLabel. Um, and the podcasts, the New Creative Era, are online and they are genuinely really good. I've put them in the weekly reading on some of the courses I teach on, and I have also shared them, maybe overshared them in some of my creative circles. Because I think they're making the argument that I'm trying to make about really doing some, collective releasing stuff together
Mm.
probably in a better way that I have been able to. So for that, yeah, I thank you both. It's been really interesting to discover both of your work. Thank you, Yancey.
Yeah, and thank you, Jamie, for we've been ambient internet
Yeah,
friends and in circles, and I appreciate how you go about things. And yeah, thanks for inviting me today.
same. Have a great day. And yeah, I will share this online soon. Thanks, Yancey. Bye
All right,
bye.
bye.